Hello everyone, and welcome to Madcap Experiments, the Magic the Gathering podcast that focuses on creative, and sometimes even competitive decks in Pioneer, Standard, and occasionally Modern. I'm your host, Odince. Today, we have a variety of topics to cover. We'll start by going over results for some of the decks discussed in the previous episodes, as well as some other decks that have been popping up in Standard. Then, discuss some new brews and finish off with a quick summary of the Avatar The Last Airbender spoilers. A couple of things at the top of the show here. You might have noticed by now that I have a new microphone. A quick shout out to my wife and mother-in-law for surprising me with that. And secondly, as of the release of the last episode, there is a Madcap Experiments YouTube channel. At the moment, it only contains audio versions of the podcast, but I do plan to upload League playthroughs at some point to showcase some of the decks discussed here in action. So keep an eye out for that. Now, on to today's episode. I want to start off the recap with one of the most fun decks I've played in quite a while, and that's the standard Big Red list with Temur, Steadfast Second. This deck was a blast to play, and I was really impressed with a lot of the individual pieces. Hasting an Overlord or a Carnosaur usually won the game on the spot, and because of those creatures, the deck has a lot of late game inevitability. I also really like both Possibility Technician and Zookeeper Mechan. Technician can be a card advantage machine, especially when paired with Temur and Soulstone Sanctuary. Zookeeper Mechan, in particular, is a nice addition to Red's toolbox. I could see this defensively statted mana dork popping up here and there in both Standard and Pioneer. The first league I played with the deck, I managed to go 4-1, facing off against 4 different Vivi decks and beating 3 of them. Off to a good start, right? Well, the wheels started to fall off pretty quickly after that. The next league, I went 2-3, and the league after that, I went 0-4 draw. So what changed between the first league and the last two? Well, for starters, the Vivi Cauldron decks have become much more refined and efficient, and other decks in the format, like Blue-White Control, proved to be strong counters to this strategy as well. I think the Vivi Cauldron deck's impact on the format is fairly obvious, so I won't beat a dead horse about it here. However, it's very hard to play a deck that relies on sticking a 4-mana permanent that does nothing the turn it comes down, and then following it up with another big spell, when something like Into the Floodmaw is very popular in the format. For 1 mana, they essentially blank 2 of our turns, assuming our best play here is to still try and cast Temur again. Blue-White might seem favored for us at first, with our above average threat density, but it's annoyingly difficult to play around their counterspells, and if you do manage to stick a threat, something like Meringue River Regent can come along and reset all your hard work. In regards to the Vivi deck, your red removal also gets outscaled pretty quickly, so you often need to have the right answer at the right time. Without enough ways to bargain it, Torch the Tower felt underwhelming in this matchup. It's also amazing how annoying Screaming Nemesis can be on the other side of the battlefield, when all you have is red removal or a big creature to block it. We know Nemesis is a great card, and that's why I even included it in the deck list, but it can be quite a thorn in the side to face down. That's not to say it's all bad. As I said earlier, the deck has lots of strong pieces, and when you actually get to pull off your plan, it's very powerful. But the current Standard format is pretty efficient, and this strategy doesn't feel like it has a home at the moment. It's definitely something to keep an eye on if the format undergoes any big shakeups in the near future. I think the deck would benefit from dipping into Boros. High Noon and Get Lost are powerful tools to help combat some of the popular strategies in the format, not to mention cards like Rest in Peace. I also think that the core package is pretty strong, and if we cut the higher mana value cards from the deck, we could have a strong medium red deck that doesn't get punished as hard. While Temur was the spark of inspiration, I don't know if it makes the final cut. Instead, we could play cards like Magmatic Hellkite, Krenko's Buzzcrusher, Hellspur Posse Boss, or even Redcap Gutter Dweller. Strong 4-mana plays that we can accelerate into, with powerful ETBs that affect the board. These mitigate some of the tempo loss from cards like Into the Floodmaw. Nova Hellkite is another option. There is a mono red dragons deck putting up results at the moment, so there's definitely space for bigger red decks, but those tend to be applying a lot of pressure, which I think some of these cards that I just mentioned would help do. The goal here is to raise the overall floor of the deck. The wheels definitely begin to fall off when Temur or the Fire Crystal get interrupted, and all of a sudden, you can't cast your 6-drop on the next turn. And while both Carnosaur and Overlord have abilities that let you utilize them when you don't have 6 mana, those abilities aren't always the most impactful. But that's it for Temur right now. Next up are the weapons manufacturing brews. I'll get the worst one out of the way first, and that was the Boros Starcage list. I think the deck list I had was just very clunky. I managed to pull off the Starcage and manufacturing combo a few times, but it didn't always feel that powerful or impactful. Nook also just wasn't that good in this version, and Carrot Cake and Candy Trail were largely underwhelming as well. Oh, and your Star Cage will exile your scene of the crimes, so don't make the same mistake I did. The deck felt like it ran out of resources pretty quickly. I've seen some Boros and Jeskai versions putting up results using United Battlefront, and I think that's probably the way to go with this particular concept. There's still lots of room to explore here, and after playing some games with the deck, it's much easier to recognize the initial deck building mistakes. This one feels largely redeemable with a few tweaks, and I think there's plenty of room to improve the overall functionality. Next is the Shrapnel control list for Pioneer. First, shout out to Fireshoes for running this through a challenge on the 10th, placing 17th with the list. I talked to him a little bit about the list after the challenge, and he said that overall, he liked the main deck. One of the cards we came up with together as both a way to deal with demons from Rakdos and to combo kill at the same time is Ratchet Bomb and or the Filigree Silex. So I added one of each before running it through a league. I ended up going 4-1 with the deck, but I promise you it's not as bad as it sounds. I had more than a few punts this league, and I think that I lost otherwise winnable matchups. Something as simple as playing a Ramonette Ruins when the Darksteel Citadel was lethal, or skipping through a key battle phase. But even with the shaky play, I came away overall impressed with the deck. The deck seemed to struggle a bit with blue-white control in particular, but Rakdos was a fairly easy 2-0. The other games were both against mono-red, and they were both very close matches, each going to game 3. There's definitely something here, but this is just a first step in figuring out the puzzle that is weapons manufacturing. Kicking Torch and Surge felt great. Grapple Blast was okay, but felt much weaker without munitions. Ratchet Bomb felt great when you were doing the thing, otherwise it was fairly low impact. Legion Extruder is hard to pin down exactly how good it feels. When you manage to kill an Emberheart Challenger with it, you feel great, and sacrificing a munition to make a 3-3 can let you block a 5 toughness creature effectively. But if you don't draw enough artifacts, it can feel pretty weak. That's one of the challenges with this style of manufacturing deck. You need to draw your pieces in the right order. Sometimes you draw the wrong half of your deck, or feel like you have to sandbag the artifacts in your hand while you wait to draw your enchantment. Or you have munitions and a bunch of instants and no ways to make tokens. So the challenge with this particular version is finding the right number of enablers and payoffs. I think one of the biggest things I discovered playing multiple weapons manufacturing decks is that for better or worse, manufacturing feels a lot like a card like Waste On. The games you draw it versus the games you don't almost make it feel like you're playing two different decks. When you land a manufacturing on 2, you feel on top of the world as you quickly stockpile munitions against your opponent. It's even better when you draw them in multiples. But the games where all 4 copies seem to be on the bottom half of your deck are rough. It can feel like you're left with a bunch of disparate cogs in a machine without the engine to make it run. So that's one of the biggest deck building challenges I think you'll face when brewing around manufacturing. How do you make your deck work when you don't draw its namesake piece? I think that's a big reason I'm so drawn to weapons manufacturing from a brewing standpoint. The best way to play it isn't necessarily obvious. It's a card that, at face value, doesn't really do anything, and it makes tokens that also don't really do anything. I realized, however, that I was only really attempting to use manufacturing in one way, and that is to use it to generate munitions tokens to sacrifice to other spells and abilities. I think that's sort of the intended design here, so it seems like a logical place to start, but as I mentioned earlier, weapons manufacturing operates in a pretty unique space for that sort of game plan, leading to that bifurcated play experience. However, if you ignore the text on munitions tokens and just treat manufacturing as an artifact generating machine, we're suddenly in a world where we have much more redundant options. This includes something like Pinnacle Emissary from the very same set. Now we can run 8+ copies of this effect, and our game plan becomes significantly more reliable. The question then becomes, what do we do with all these artifacts? I haven't actually gone too deep down this rabbit hole yet. Affinity seems like a decent place to start, but I'm not convinced the payoffs are that powerful. Weftstalker Ardent is a creature from Edge of Eternities that pings whenever an artifact or creature enters the battlefield, and the Antiquities War is a saga that's last chapter turns all of our artifacts into 5/5s. There are a lot of avenues to explore. Lurking Evil, over in the Faithless Brewing Discord, has been sharing some of their lists with emissary manufacturing, and it's got the brain moving, so I'll probably come back to this idea. Up next, I haven't had a chance to play the Rakdos Rottenmouth Viper list, but Cavedan tagged me with a 5-0 list from Pioneer by the user Cdnewlon, and it looks sweet. I'll have the deck list in the episode description. He's playing a full set of Oni Cult Anvil from Neon Dynasty, which in hindsight seems like an obvious inclusion with manufacturing. If you don't know what the anvil does, it reads, Whenever one or more artifacts you control leave the battlefield during your turn, create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then tap, sacrifice an artifact. This ability deals 1 damage to each opponent. You gain 1 life. What I really like about this is that once it's on the field, it's free and repeatable, similar to the cat oven combo. It's unfortunate that it only makes 1 token and only on your turn, but it provides some extra reach and life gain, as well as a steady supply of blockers, and that can add up. I think I'll try to include Anvil in a Rakdos version of my Shrapnel control list as well. Anvil seems like a better fit over Legion Extruder, and we get to upgrade Demand Answers into Deadly Dispute. Lastly, I blitzed through a modern friendly league with none other than Mono Black Burn, featuring 4 timeline color. I finished 4-1 despite forgetting to include the Black Burn All-Star Chancellor of the Dross, beating Boros Energy twice. Timeline color was great here, doubling as a shock in the earlier turn, and a recursive threat to close out that last bit of damage. Bump in the Night, Soul Spike, Necrodominance, you get the point. The deck itself is pretty straightforward, so there isn't much else for me to say about it in the brew section, but if you've never cast a Sleeper Agent before, I think it's something you absolutely need to try at least once. Trust me, you'll be hooked. So that pretty much covers the recap. I attended a standard RCQ on the 9th and made top 8 with Mono Red. However, there was only 8 players, so it was essentially single elimination, and I lost the first round to Blue-White Control. Meringue River Regent is a powerful card, and copying it with 3 steps ahead is even better. Not too much to report here, except Draconautics Engineer continues to be one of my favorite creatures in the format. Next, on to the brews for the episode. First up is Temur Stormsplitter for both Standard and Pioneer. I'll start with Pioneer, since that's where I fell in love with this strategy. Stormsplitter is a 1/4 Otter Wizard for 3 and a red that reads Haste, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a token that's a copy of this creature. Exile that token at the beginning of the next end step. Stormsplitter is the type of card where when you look at it, the gears immediately start turning. With just 4 instants or sorceries, you will already have over 30 power on board, although generally, you'll need the 5th spell to win with this list. One of the obvious choices to pair with Stormsplitter is the card Cryptolith Rite, an enchantment for 1 and a green that lets your creatures tap for a mana of any color. In Standard, we have Enduring Vitality to play a similar role. So now we have a combo plan reminiscent of the old Jeskai Ascendancy Sylvan Awakening decks, which I always really enjoyed. The strength in this combo here relies on how hard it can be to actually interact with the combo once the pieces are in play. Spot removal is probably not going to do the trick, since you can always respond at instant speed. I remember playing this deck shortly after the release of Bloomburrow, and I was able to combo kill the opponent all while their removal spell was still on the stack. Another thing I like about this combo is that Stormsplitter, unlike Sylvan Awakening, is actually a must-answer threat for the opponent. Sometimes you can just run the splitter out on turn 4, even without Cryptolith Rite, and if your opponent does not have an immediate answer, you're more than likely to win on the next turn. The deck list itself is actually pretty straightforward. Stormsplitter, Cryptolith Rite, a couple of removal spells, and a boatload of card draw. For some reason, we still get to play Treasure Cruise, and there's no need for me to explain how good that is. We have the full 12 Opt, Consider, and Sleight of Hand, as well as some copies of the card Consult the Star Charts from Edge of Eternities. This card has already proved itself in standard lists, and here it works perfectly as a mini dig through time. For additional creatures, I'm running a small Otter package of 3 Thundertrap Trainer and 2 Valley Floodcaller. Thundertrap Trainer works nicely to find our Cryptolith Rite and makes an okay blocker. Valley Floodcaller gives us some redundancy here, combining nicely with Cryptolith Rite while also making it easier to combo off with Stormsplitter, reducing the total number of spells needed for lethal. If you don't know what Floodcaller does, it's 2 and a blue for a 2/2 Otter that reads Flash. You may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until the end of the turn, untap them. So with Stormsplitter on the field, you can put your Floodcaller trigger on the stack first, and then your copies will all gain that stat boost and untap. Floodcaller also lets you use your Thundertrap trainers that might be sitting around to combo off as well. The ability to cast your non-creature spells at instant speed isn't trinket text either. It really helps with the control matchup to flash in your Cryptolith Rite at the end of their turn, or to flash in a Treasure Cruise in response to your opponent trying to destroy your Stormsplitter. Floodcaller adds a lot of additional angles to the deck that I really like. It'll pop up in another list later on as well. If you're not interested in the Otter package, you could play something like Corey Steelcutter in those slots. That might even end up being correct as a powerful plan B. There are a couple of copies of Artist Talent here making an appearance, and honestly, we only really care about that first level. Because our combo is not deterministic, and there is an ability to whiff, we really want to make sure that we have a way to filter out our draws on our combo turn. Sometimes, having 2 lands on the top of your deck can spell the end for you. If you do find yourself in a position where you are unable to win the turn Splitter comes down, something you can do is save your spells to cast until the end step of your turn. The tokens last until the next end step. And when you get to the end of your opponent's turn, you can respond to the trigger to let the copies replace themselves. I've done this play a few times, and it works even if your opponent removes the original copy. The deck is a blast to play, and I'm excited to pick it up again. It's great for screenshot equity too. Often you can end up with boards of 60 plus Otters. It does seem like a nightmare to play in paper though. Next up is the standard version, and the game plan is pretty similar here. The main difference is having to play Enduring Vitality over Cryptolith Rite. While not strictly worse, it is a little clunky, and the double green pips can make the mana tricky. I'm actually just going to share one of the recent 5-0 lists here, since the strategy has been putting up results lately. It's still playing a bunch of cantrips, as well as standard all-stars stock up. Analyze the Pollen helps to fix the mana in the early turns, and we can collect evidence for 8 to tutor up either half of the combo. The stock list also seem to be playing a couple copies of Meringue River Regent, which I quite like. The Omen spell is perfect for the turns that you get to combo, and the Dragon half can help turn a game around if you have the mana to cast it. I think standard at the moment requires you to be able to finish off a game quite quickly and decisively, so the Stormsplitter combo seems like a solid choice. The stock lists do lose some points for me though, from the lack of Valley Floodcallers, but I do understand the decision. Lucky for me, they have a home in my next deck list. And that is Mono Blue Otter Prowess for standard. This deck aims to take full advantage of Floodcaller. Pre-rotation, I'd been using some of the Convoke spells from March of the Machine to free cast with the Otters and then use Floodcaller to untap them again. While we don't have Meeting of the Minds or Stoke the Flames in standard anymore, we actually have something better. Winter Night Stories. Winter Night Stories is a card that has been popping up all over standard, especially in the tier 0 Vivi Cauldron decks. And while Harmonize doesn't work exactly like Convoke, it still works well with Floodcaller to make for explosive turns. The Vivi Cauldron decks are pairing stories with Proph's Eidetic Memory, and we're going to do that here as well, so let's take a look at the list. We have playsets of Elusive Otter and Storm Chaser's Talent, as well as a few copies of Mockingbird. We've seen many times how good 1-drops with Prowess are, and while not an Otter, Mockingbird still gets untapped by Floodcaller, and it carries the counters from Prophs very well. Not to mention, you can turn it into one of your 1-drop Otters for an explosive start, or copy a Floodcaller to really go over the top. There are a couple of copies of Kitsa Otterball Elite, another Otter with Prowess and Vigilance that taps to loot and can copy a spell. We have 4 Ops and 4 Unending Whispers, a sorcery for a single blue that draws a card and has Harmonize for 5 and a blue. For interaction, we have Into the Floodmaw and Ureni's Rebuff, a 2-mana bounce spell with Harmonize for 5 and a blue as well as a couple of copies of Shore Up. There is a small green splash in the mana base to allow for the casting of the adventure half of Elusive Otter, as well as a couple of copies of Soulstone Sanctuary, which for us is more Otters. I played a deck similar to this months ago in a standard event, and I was very impressed with how quick Mono Blue could be at ending the game, even without access to burn spells and the like. I had Prophs in the list back then as well, mostly as another permanent to bounce with This Town Ain't Big Enough. I'd liked it then, but I'd really wished that Sleight of Hand triggered it. Now we have another 1-mana cantrip that can do that. There are obvious limitations to being a Mono Blue, and I think something like a Red Splash could be really good. Wild Ride is another card with Harmonize that actually makes it easier to harmonize our other spells, since you only ever get to tap a single creature for the Harmonize cost. For a single red, it gives a creature plus 3/0 in haste, with Harmonize for 4 and a red. So on an empty board state with 5 mana, we can cast a Floodcaller, cast Wild Ride to give it haste, Harmonize for a single red, untap, and then we can attack with a 10/10. Balmor Battlemage Captain could replace Kitsa, giving us another way to pump the team, as well as giving them trample. And then there's the obvious additions of the red removal of your choice. There's a lot of flexibility here, but that's enough Otters for one episode. Next up, I'd like to highlight a core package of cards that revolve around Icetill Explorer. Everything I'm going to say here is piggybacking heavily off of the hard work that Cavedan and Law 11 have been doing over in the Faithless Brewing Discord. They've both already put up multiple 5-0s with various versions of the list, and I'd expect to hear an in-depth summary on the next Faithless Brewing episode, as well as a write-up on Law 11's Substack, What If Brews, so keep an eye out for those. So as I mentioned, the key piece of these strategies is Icetill Explorer. For 2 green, we get a 2/4 that reads, you may play an additional land on each of your turns, you may play lands from your graveyard, and landfall, whenever a land you control enters, mill a card. So, Explorer, in conjunction with cards like Llanowar Elves, Molt Tender, Insidious Fungus, Esper Origin, as well as some basic fetch lands and untapped surveil lands, we get a very efficient ramp and mill package. It's very easy to end up with a bunch of lands in play and cards in the grave. A lot of the brewing happening right now seems to be finding the best way to actually close out the game. There's been the Railway Brawler plus Devastating Onslaught combo, various insect shells with Gene Morph Imago, Season of Lost builds, and then the one I tried which uses Rise of the Varmints and use Social Engineering to combo with Enduring Courage. I basically copied one of Law 11's decks and just swapped a few cards for a package untested, and I ended up getting a 3/2. Enduring Courage was pretty medium here, but I think at the moment that's unimportant. What is important is just how strong that core package I mentioned earlier is. Icetill Explorer to me feels like it has the potential to be a pillar of the current standard format, and if the Vivi Cauldron deck does end up receiving a ban in a couple of months, then these decks could be the next top dog. These decks at a glance can be hard to parse. It might not be clear how the cards are really doing much of anything, so I highly recommend giving it a try and playing a few matches with it. I'm excited to see where these decks end up. There's so much room for customization and versatility. They're operating in their own unique space, and it's a ton of fun to play. I'm going to take a minute here, at the end of the show, to briefly go over the new Avatar The Last Airbender spoilers. I won't be doing a card-by-card breakdown. Instead, just going over some mechanics I'm excited about, and maybe a couple of specific interactions. Truthfully, I'm not even sure when the set releases. I'm pretty sure it's after the Spider-Man set, but don't quote me on that. First, lessons are back, and some of them are instants. There aren't going to be any cards with Learn in the set, so for Standard, it's mostly just flavor, although there does seem to be a small Lessons Matter theme in the set. For Pioneer, this is really a nice addition however. While the Learn mechanic hasn't accomplished much in the format, one card in particular has always caught my eye, and that's Divide by Zero. It's essentially a 3-mana Unsubstantiate that draws a card, and now that pool of cards has gotten much better. We get a Mind Rot, a Quench, and a 5-mana counterspell that draws a card, mills 3, and untaps a land. 2 of my favorites revealed so far are Airbending Lesson and Waterbending Lesson, both aptly named in that they teach us, the player, what these mechanics do. So let's take a look at those specifically. Airbending Lesson is an instant for 2 and a white that reads, Airbend target non-land permanent, draw a card. And Waterbending Lesson is a sorcery for 3 and a blue that reads, draw 3 cards, then discard a card unless you waterbend 2. So let's get into each of the bending mechanics. Most of them have a number attached to them, as shown with the Waterbending Lesson, except for Airbending, and each of them seem to be tied to a color. Airbending exiles a non-land permanent, and then its owner can recast it for 2 colorless. Pretty straightforward, and we've seen this style of tax effect in white a bunch before. There's some versatility here though. We can use it to slow down our opponents, or to flicker our permanent with a powerful ETB. The lesson drawing you a card here is a nice bonus as well. I've already found an infinite combo in Standard with 2 of the airbending creatures in the set, and Doc Orlok from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Orlok is a 2/3 for blue and a green that had the important line of text, spells you cast from your graveyard or exile cost 2 less to cast. So the Doctor makes all of our permanents that have been airbended free to play. This already seems like a pretty powerful interaction. It might just come down to how tricky the 3-color mana base is. Forgive me if I butcher any of the names here, I've not seen Avatar The Last Airbender, so bear with me. The cards that combo with Doc are Aang, The Last Airbender, and Appa, Steadfast Guardian. Aang is a 3/2 flyer for 3 and a white that reads, when Aang enters, airbend up to one of their target non-land permanent. Whenever you cast a lesson spell, Aang gains lifelink until the end of turn. And Appa is a 3/4 flash flyer for 2 white that reads, when Appa enters, airbend any number of target other non-land permanents you control, and then whenever you cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 white ally creature token. Oh yeah, allies are back. More on that in just a bit. Individually, they aren't too bad. Aang provides some disruption, and Appa can protect your board and help you build back the following turn. However, if we can ever manage to get them both out with Doc Orlok, we can start airbending the 2 infinitely, and thanks to Appa, we will have infinite 1/1 tokens. It is a 3-card combo in 3 colors that requires 2 4-drops, and wins on the next turn, so I don't see it poised to take over the format, but it could be the beginnings of a solid mid-range shell that has a combo finish. On to water bending. It's a combination of convoke and improvise. You can tap both artifacts and creatures, but only for colorless mana. Great if you have a bunch of artifact tokens lying around, say from a certain red enchantment, or if you have something like Kona, Rescue Beastie in play. Earthbending puts a number of +1/+1 counters on target land, equal to the earthbending number, and gives it haste. So Earthbend 4 gives you a hasty 4/4 land. In addition, Earthbend also says that when the land dies or is exiled, it's returned to the battlefield tapped. This is a really nice bonus, and I'm sure most of us have experienced the pain of our man land dying. My immediate reaction to seeing Earthbend is Jeskai Ascendancy shenanigans in Pioneer. Fingers crossed they give us an Earthbend spell that can animate multiple lands. Lastly is Firebending, and it's a bit of a weird one. Whenever a creature with Firebending attacks, you gain an amount of red mana equal to the Firebending number. This mana lasts until the end of combat. That's a fairly narrow window to use the mana, so I see it mostly being used for combat tricks and pump abilities like Hired Claw. Maybe there's a way to abuse it with a flipped Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but that remains to be seen. That about covers the bending mechanics, and next, and for the last topic of the show, allies are back. Allies are one of the first decks that got me hooked on Magic. Having multiple Halimar Excavators or Akun Battlesingers in play was so much fun, and the deck was pretty beginner friendly too. Modern Magic has largely seemed to eclipse these types of typal strategies, and allies were always on the lower end of that anyways, but who knows, maybe they'll get the pieces they need here. It's unfortunate that most of the relevant ally cards are only legal in Modern, but Pioneer does have some decent options, including Ally Encampment, a 5-color land for the type with some added utility. One notable new addition from the set is Katara, the Fearless. She's blue-white-green for a 3/3 that reads, if a triggered ability of an ally you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. A Panharmonicon for allies is kind of perfect, and they have some fairly powerful triggered abilities, so doubling up is really nice. The color requirement is largely trivial in both Pioneer and Modern, thanks to a multitude of 5-color typal lands as well. There's also Haru, Hidden Talent, a 1/1 ally for 1 and a green that says, whenever another ally you control enters, Earthbend 1. Another nice utility piece, you can just keep stacking counters on your Mutavault if you want. You still need to animate it with its ability, but thanks to Earthbend, if it dies, now you get it back. I doubt these are enough to make the strategy meta relevant, but I wasn't really expecting any new allies, so it's a nice surprise. I'll probably burn some tickets in the future trying these out. I hope we're a long ways away from a Pioneer Horizon set, but if we do ever get one, maybe they'll import some of the OG Zendikar allies into the format. And that wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Next episode might have a delayed release as I have a small vacation coming up, but hopefully it's not too late. I hope you all have a great day. This is Odince, signing off.